Okay, so we're going to talk about a project that we're currently working on and share some interim findings today. You'll have seen the banners around the room. We need to talk about hands-free. This is our message and our mantra, and anytime you see any of us speaking anywhere, we will have one of these banners strapped to our backs. We really think we need to talk about hands-free. So the project, as I said, is funded by the Road Safety Trust. And it's motivated by a lot of our research on hands-free mobile phone use and the cognitive distraction that it causes drivers and what that means in terms of road safety, number of collisions. So we were interested, this idea came about after between us, been and talked at lots of different events, shared our research findings, talked about resistance to the law as it stands, resistance to messaging relating to hands-free mobile phone use, and why that might be the case and what we could do within the confines of current legislation to improve that situation. What can we learn and what can we therefore change? So it struck us that a really important interaction that occurs on a daily basis is a roads policing officer, or indeed an officer who isn't associated with a roads policing unit, and a mobile phone offender, someone they've pulled over for using their handheld device. What happens during that interaction? What advice is given? What words are shared? How does that interaction feel? Is it awkward? Is it difficult? And what can we learn from that? With the view that maybe we could have some evidence-based practice, and we might be able to think about how we can add to those interactions to maybe talk about hands-free mobile phone use as well. So our aims were to understand what happens at those stops, what the interactions are like, but also we wanted to explore what police officers think about distraction, both in terms of the current law, how they enforce it, the challenges that they might face in enforcing that law themselves, officer understanding of other aspects of distraction, including hands-free mobile phone use. As a room, I think we've all got a very clear awareness of the dangers of hands-free mobile phone use, not least because we've been banging on about it all morning. But it doesn't mean that all roads policing officers have a similar awareness. So as part of this project, which we haven't quite got to yet, so we're not going to present today, we've offered some education to the police officers who've engaged in our study. So what we've done is we've created an interactive educational experience, we're calling it, which lots of you will have seen. It's been shared by National Highways, Driving for Better Business. It's Are You a Focused Driver? And it's very similar to Melina's work in that it allows you to experience your own distraction for yourself, not the distraction of other people, yourself. And it nicely, I would say, demonstrates the limits of human attention. And it's based on the notion of inattentional blindness, which some of my own researchers identified, whereby drivers talking on a hands-free mobile phone can look directly at a hazard but fail to see it because their attention is allocated to that phone conversation. So what we've done as part of this project is we've questioned police officers, we've surveyed them up front, we've then given them this interactive experience, and then we've surveyed them again afterwards to see if we can perhaps change attitudes, if that was needed, to increase awareness, if that was needed, and to see what that might mean in practice moving forward. So for today, we're just going to present the interim findings, so not with that intervention, just the attitudes of police officers and their experience of those interactions. So what we've done, we've surveyed 411 police officers from across all UK forces. We've done an online survey. The officers have an average of 14 years experience on the job, and there's a balance of those who are associated with a roads policing unit, a specific RPU, and those who aren't, but nevertheless enforce the law on the roads. Leanne then also carried out 10 in-depth one-on-one interviews with police officers from partner forces, and you'll hear some of the qualitative comments, very enlightening information later on in the presentation. So as I said, the focus is on attitudes to mobile phone use, their views on enforcement, their experiences of interacting with offenders, and what guidance they offer those offenders. I told you I'll be a bore about this. This is a reminder, this is our starting point, and this is what forms basically the interactive educational experience that all officers receive after filling out this survey. So remember, we're talking about the cognitive distraction caused by mobile phone use, and that hands-free not being any safer than handheld phone use. Our motivation clearly is, if we want to improve road safety by eliminating driver distraction, as Helen said at the start, we need to address all distraction, not just the illegal part of the behaviour. So we'll move on to the findings.
Okay, this is our first histogram, I think is the right phrase, from that survey data. And I think it's important to note that first that officers are willing to use the law to tackle mobile phone use. 96%, not shown here, but 96% of police officers that we surveyed agreed that mobile phone use is a significant safety issue. And this is important because it evidences the fact that they are willing to use that law, that they will be pulling people over that they see using the phone handheld. Essentially, it wouldn't be relevant what officers think about hands-free or do about hands-free or do about handheld if there wasn't that sense in the first place that they're going to do something about it when they see it. So what this one simply shows is that officers think there is a problem here that needs solving and that they have a role in solving that. They also, fundamentally importantly, think that the law is effective. They think there is a point to enforcing the mobile phone law as it stands, the 2003/22 law we've been talking about. So very strong agreement there with the idea that mobile phone law as it currently stands improves road safety and is something that they want to use, that they are willing to use and are going to be using. So we're talking about a bunch of people who are going to be trying to take action around this. They care about it. How do officers apply the existing mobile phone law? Well, having shown that 96% of them, I think it was, say that they are willing to enforce the law, they would enforce the law should be enforced, officers did show that they also felt that discretion was necessary here. So while they say that they are really likely to use the law, they also, it seems, define what they count as actually a law-breaking incident. So there's much more variation here in what officers would do when they saw somebody who was eligible to be charged with a mobile phone offence. So this is officer discretion. This is, and our data from the officer interviews shows, this is about thinking about things like the duration of the handheld phone use. Was it just a quick, or were they on it for the whole time and was following them and they never even saw me because they were so engrossed in it? Was it, as we heard earlier, used in a stationary, a traffic light perhaps? Was it used in a lay-by? Was it used, was it somebody who perhaps failed the attitude test when they were pulled over? Was it somebody who was known as one of the usual suspects for another type of offence? So what I think we've got here is that officers are pretty much 100% guaranteed to use the law, but they define whether they think an offence has been committed or not. It's not black and white. They will use their discretion to decide when they need to use that law or when they might issue words of advice or a warning, for example.
So, in our interviews, officers talked about a desire to educate. They want to educate road users. They want to educate drivers, particularly for those whose offending was low level. In the second quote there, you can kind of see that. It's just engaging with those who might touch their sat-navs, do something a little bit naughty, but not massively naughty. Those drivers really need to be educated, and I'm keen to educate them. I have a desire to educate them. And so whilst quantitatively we know that officers want to use the law and they're willing to use the law, there are things that they think about before doing that, and there are things that inform that as well. So roadside education was described as an often appropriate alternative to prosecution, and using that as kind of a way of managing interactions, using this educational opportunity during those interactions and actually assessing the receptivity of the people that were given that education. So actually, if I give you this opportunity to educate you at the roadside and you still don't take that on board, then I might take it further. But kind of this kind of notion, as you can see in that last quote there, I'm not in the business of taking away people's driving licences, is something that kept coming up. The officers talked about young drivers are going to have their licences taken away. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to educate. And almost kind of that idea of education being a really important thing, and as I'll come on to in a minute, is that at the expense of using legislation in other ways. Officers were keen, they wanted to educate, and particularly for those who are receptive to it. And not only do they want to educate, they think the public need educating. Actually, it is to do this. More than simply being to educating, these people need to be educated. I should be doing this. I need to be educating these people. So almost 90% of the officers who completed the questionnaires either agreed or strongly agreed that more education is needed for the general public about the dangers, about the risks around phone use. So they kind of do appreciate that actually drivers are needing education. They can kind of perceive that drivers are ill-informed, that they're doing this because they're not educated, and therefore part of my role is to educate them. So officers think that the public need educating and are willing to do that as part of that interaction at the roadside. But the concern really, out of some of the quantitative and qualitative data that we've generated, is what that roadside education looks like. So even though they're saying drivers don't know about the risks, they need educating, when we asked officers about their understanding of the risks and dangers associated with hands-free phone conversations, you can see there that there is a high-level agreement that hands-free phone conversation is safer than handheld. So officers themselves are perhaps not that well informed, with over 70% agreeing or strongly agreeing that hands-free is safer than handheld, which we might expect given what the law tells us, given what common sense tells us about physical and visual distraction, which we can quite easily see. And although this statement is not true, you can see that there's high levels of agreement there. And we've found that in previous research with the general public as well, that they do consider hands-free to be safer, a safer alternative to handheld mobile phone use. So we know from previous research it's not just officers, but officers also are kind of subject to that thought. So in addition to those numbers, 91% of officers say that they explain to those that they stop why phone use is dangerous. But again, problematically in relation to that conversation and that interaction, when we talked to officers, their focus was on the physical and the visual distraction. So we also know that what officers talk about being the biggest issue that they do help drivers with is that physical and visual distraction. It's where your eyes are pointing, it's what your hands are doing. And again, quite logically, for officers, as we found with members of the public with drivers in other research, I can quite clearly see that if somebody is doing this, or if somebody is kind of wandering their eyes over here, they're distracted. But it's more difficult for me to see that if someone's doing this, I can't see that distraction, it's really difficult. And so officers really did focus on that physical and visual distraction, where they did understand that there are dangers, but that invisible distraction that they couldn't see was more difficult for them to kind of get to grips with and explain. One officer even explains that they are fortunate that they can turn to hands-free. So they're fortunate that they can turn to this alternative kind of distraction that we know is equally dangerous. And officers talked about their own kind of driver behaviours, their own phone use as well as that of the drivers that they interact with. I liked being told about the academics will argue this. Yes, he did know I was an academic and still told me what I would tell him. And kind of also in that bottom quote there, you can kind of see the idea that officers don't understand why are people still breaking the law when they've got all the technology they need to not break the law. And that kind of generated a bit of frustration. But again, the focus was on that handheld. If we've got all the technology to be hands-free, why aren't people driving hands-free? So the kind of focus there, again, is all on that physical, the visual. It's what we're doing with our hands and our eyes. And the idea that if it's available and if it's legal, why aren't people using it? And that kind of complicated, I don't understand why people are still doing the illegal thing when we've given them lots of ways to get around the illegal thing. So the kind of focus, as we might expect, is very much on that problematic nature of illegal actions. I think that's you.
Cheers. So as we said, the issue with officers having sort of misguided perceptions of what actually the consequences of hands-free use is not just hypothetical, it actually has implications. It's about what they do at the roadside. So that belief translates into action. This is what officers that we surveyed were telling people at the roadside. I advise offenders to use a hands-free kit or Bluetooth in future. Part of this research, as we say, we drew on conversations and things that we had with officers from different places, but also from watching some of these Channel 5 TV programmes, traffic cops, interceptors, roads policing, this, that and the other, which I watch far too many. I really need to switch off. But in those, you can see officers talking to the camera and saying, I pulled this person over. She seems like a really nice person. I don't want her to lose her job. So I've helped her set up Bluetooth and sent her on her way. And part of that was, that obviously triggered us somewhat. And that was part of the motivation for this, that actually that misbelief about the safety of hands-free is translating into action. Officers are telling people to do something that is legal but is unsafe. And that's obviously a problem. So 82% would recommend hands-free to somebody they pulled over using a handheld phone, and 90% are proud to advise drivers on how to be compliant in future, which is fine if your law is effective and appropriate. If not, you're advising them to comply with a law, but you're sending them off safe from prosecution, but in no way safe in terms of their distracted driving, which, as of course, is a bit of a challenge. So, I say, some quotes to back up the quantitative data there. I'll let you absorb those for just a second. What I think these strongly evidence is what Leanne was saying. There is that kind of disbelief, that kind of, well, why wouldn't they? And clearly, officers really felt that this was something that would help these people and that they should be advised to do. So, in some cases, they were actually helping them set up Bluetooth or hands-free and sending them on their way. On their way, yeah, safe in the knowledge they won't get caught again, but not safe in safety terms.
Okay, so as well as wanting to educate, officers talked about wanting to avoid ruining people's lives by giving them penalty points. So you can kind of see that very much in kind of these quotes here, that second quote in particular. I'm very aware I don't want to ruin people's lives. And in the first quote, you can kind of see these people that I'm pulling over are law-abiding people. They're Middle England. I don't want to piss them off. I don't want to do anything that's going to come back and bite me on the butt. So actually, when we talked to officers, really interestingly, they talked about these interactions at the roadside, these encounters with drivers, with members of the public, as really important in their relationship with the public at a general level. And they talked about the possible repercussions of doing bad things during those interactions, but talked about those bad things as enforcing the law. So if I enforce the law, someone might then not do something good for me when I need them in the future. So when I'm outside their house, I'm knocking on their door, they're a witness to an offence. They're not going to help me because I've given them 6 points on their licence. And we had kind of other examples of, you know, if I'm in a fight with a member of the public, who's going to help me if we're out there putting points on people's licences and doing all these terrible things, enforcing the law. So kind of they talked about the possible repercussions of this for other areas of their work. What I do on the roads is really important for other interactions that I might have with these people, particularly those where I require public support or I need the public to kind of be on board. And the roads policing interaction being one that can kind of be influential upon how the members of the public kind of receive that or engage with that future interaction. And this is really interesting because it suggests to us that kind of officers see those roads encounters as potentially problematic and unfair just for enforcing the law. And in contrast, they talked about kind of helping people with hands-free. I'll help you set up that Bluetooth system. I'll give you this education as a fair alternative to enforcing the law. Almost equating that kind of leniency and opportunity for discretion as what fairness is, which is a little bit problematic. It's kind of as though they see these interactions as having really negative impacts upon their legitimacy and their relationships with the public, which we know doesn't have to be the case. As long as these interactions take place fairly and appropriately, and that they're done in a particular way that kind of is treating people with respect, is meaning that actually the outcomes that people receive are kind of distributed equally, and the interactions that we have are kind of not judgmental, and not saying, well, actually, you're not receptive to that education, you're getting the points. That's going to have a more negative impact than kind of having an unbiased kind of interaction. So actually, we know that these interactions are challenging, but the way that officers talked about managing that challenge was to be tending towards avoiding prosecution, avoiding enforcement, and actually helping members of the public with their hands-free by giving them education as an alternative at the roadside rather than enforcing the law. And we know that it can be done well. This enforcement practice can be done well. The education can be done well and not have these negative impacts on that legitimacy and that experience. So it's a really important kind of aspect of the research that all of this informs what goes into those interactions and what the public are taking out of it, how they're interpreting, oh, he was a nice officer because he didn't do me for it. And kind of what happens after that then is really important as well. But that's lots of stuff perhaps for another day, I think.
So, to summarise, what do officers think about mobile phone use? They think handheld mobile phone use is dangerous. I don't think we're going to get any disagreement there. They think, and they demonstrate, that discretion is needed in applying the law, which I think is particularly interesting for all of the reasons that Leanne's just outlined. Mobile phone encounters can be tricky, can be challenging to negotiate, and therefore that and the context of the situation, the context of the phone use, is brought together to help with this officer discretion, to help them decide what the best course of action is. It is not the case that the officers we've surveyed have said, right, I've caught you on your phone, you're absolutely going to be prosecuted, despite the quantitative data which we showed at the start of the presentation, where there was really strong agreement that mobile phone use by drivers should always be enforced. So there's some complexity, there's some nuance around that situation. Often, words of advice are seen as the fairer option for these otherwise law-abiding citizens. We don't want to ruin their day. We don't want them to lose their job. We're nice people too. And you can understand the need to manage that relationship, but what message does that send to the general public and to those who decide to offend on a regular basis? And we know from other research that drivers who use their mobile phones tend to do so quite frequently. Officer views are that hands-free mobile phone use is safer than handheld. As we've heard, other research has demonstrated that this is a view amongst the general public. This isn't just police officers, and it's entirely understandable that view is prevalent, given, of course, the police's focus on the law and enforcing the law as it stands. And they also think that advising hands-free phone use can help both the driver and the officer. You're compliant with the law, off you go, safe and well. But unfortunately, as we've said multiple times, if we want to achieve Vision Zero, if we want to eliminate all road death, then we can't really just enforce one form of distraction. We also asked them about hands-free mobile phone use in relation to, well, what do you think about if we were to ban hands-free mobile phone use? What do you think about that? General views were it would be unenforceable. I think that's a view that's widely shared by many. That it would be taking away a freedom that people currently have. You know, it's legal and it's safe to have a hands-free phone conversation. You can save time, you can keep up and keep on. So actually to remove it would be really problematic and would probably make those interactions between officer and offender even more challenging. So there's some complexity around that situation. So lots for us to think about, and we're yet, of course, to see what happens after they've engaged with their education. So what next? We have asked officers about their own distraction, both in terms of driving for work and driving at home. And I don't think it's a massive spoiler alert to say that police officers suffer from self-enhancement bias too. We need to look at the data in more detail because, of course, a lot of our respondents, the police officers, have advanced driving training. So there may be some element there that, you know, they are more advanced drivers, of course. But what that doesn't mean is that their brain works differently in terms of their attention and how that affects their visual perception. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the impact of this interactive educational experience whereby people are faced with their own distraction. So you watch a series of driving clips, you listen to a mobile phone conversation, and you need to remember a shopping list of items that your mobile phone partner is saying to you. And then you're asked how many items on the shopping list you can recall, and on how many of these hazards did you spot. And what tends to happen is that they do well in one or other of the tasks because they're shifting their attention between the tasks, not dividing it. That's not how human attention works. So the hope is that this interactive, which has been used very widely and adopted by other police forces, is that it demonstrates to police officers that they too are prone to self-enhancement bias, but they are also prone to distraction. And therefore that might help to affect attitudes in relation to those roadside educations. So the main issue is how can we stop enforcement of the law we have got from undermining the safety objective that we all share. In the absence of any change in the law, and that's not going to happen anytime soon, we've been trying, it's not going to happen anytime soon, we need to think about effective strategies for mitigating some of this risk, because it is very real risk. So we would argue that perhaps some evidence-based practice in relation to these roadside encounters could do something. It's not going to solve the entire problem, but not encouraging officers to help set up someone's Bluetooth and wave them on their way, perhaps emboldening officers to enforce the law as it currently stands. I've caught you on your phone, bam, done. No negotiation, context doesn't matter, that's it. So that's what we're hoping to do, the next steps, some strategies for that.
And we thought it'd be nice to just remind ourselves about some of the safety objectives we have. As we've said, the law is not by any means perfect, but this is about safety. This is about those orange blobs that Gemma showed us back at the start. And the point on the left, even if we achieve 100% compliance with handheld law, we've already mentioned, we might not see the changes we expect in terms of distracted driving. And there's various reasons for that. And some of the data I'm just going to share with you now, we only got yesterday afternoon, I think. We conducted a very rapid YouGov omnibus survey of 2,000 random sample of 2,000 people. We only asked them 2 questions. We asked them about their mobile phone use while driving, and then we posed the question, supposing you were caught by a police officer or by a camera that can detect mobile phone use, what would you do in future? And this is the data that we got. So I don't expect you to be able to read what it says down the side. I shall tell you what it says down the side. The red bar, these are the people, and there are 31% of them who said they would not use their phone again at all. So these are similar to the ones in an Adam's presentation that said, that would do it for me, I would never use it again. Again, we should be cautious about motivations translating into action, as Adam reminded us. I'm going to skip the next bar and come back to it. The hot pink, which has not come out as hot on there as the third one down, let's call it, is people who said they would limit their handheld phone use, but they would not stop it. And that's almost 20% of drivers. The blue, has it come out blue? It's come out blue, excellent. They would continue as before. They're probably the people who rated themselves 10 out of 10, Adam, I would imagine. The green, yes, it's green. They would continue and they would hide their handheld use. They're convinced that they're able to do what they continue to do and they'll keep doing it, regardless of the fact that they've been caught once. Perhaps they were just unlucky. But then if we switch back to that lovely throbbing purple bar, the second one down, you've all been wondering what that one is. Perhaps you've guessed. That's the 33% of people who would just switch to hands-free. So regardless of whether they've been told to by a police officer, advised to or not, regardless of whether they've received their notification in the post that they've been caught by a camera perhaps, they're just going to switch to hands-free. Our second point then. If we advise phone-using drivers to use hands-free kits, now stick with me on this one, we're doing the equivalent of advising a driver that we pull over for not wearing a seatbelt. We're advising them to basically get one of these. Okay? We are giving them something that keeps them safe from prosecution. I said go with me, right? We're giving them something that keeps safe from prosecution but does nothing towards their safety. Let's imagine our research found that police officers were handing out these at the roadside to people they caught wearing no seatbelt. Thank you.